where in the world are you? What is your experience with your role and everything that has been going on in the last 2 years?
Sure. Yeah, we're based in New York City. We're a small healthcare technology startup, and the company was fully New York City office based until March 13th, 2020, when we very rapidly went remote and never came back. And since then, we've hired about half our workforce across the country. And we're in a very big comp alignment exercise right now to try to do a better job understanding where the market is for each of our different departments, creating a comp philosophy. And obviously a lot of that is tied to retention. We have actually had very little turnover, but we're having a big issue hiring new people because they're really expensive and really demanding, which in some ways is good. On the other hand, like, it's a little bit difficult hiring if you're really going to get top talent, but everyone is asking for a lot of money. It's hard to know the true value that they'll bring to the company. So
beautiful. And Julie, what is your role? Are you in charge of?
I was the first employee at the company after the two co-founders, and I've been the chief operating officer for the last 4 years.
Beautiful. Okay. And how involved are you in bringing in people now?
I have been very involved. We are moving it more into HR now and then making departments, but I'm in charge of all of the comp, bonus, equity, and retention strategy that we're developing. I'm running that.
Beautiful. Okay, good. So I love that it's perfect that there's us. And so you guys, I want you to ask questions, anything that comes up for you. I want it to be engaging. The more the conversation we have, the better for all of us. So I know Elizabeth has a few things that I pulled some information recently as of yesterday or the day before around current situations that most people are experiencing as leaders and business owners, CEOs, culture, et cetera. Elizabeth, do you want to share?
Absolutely. So there was a Fortune article that was just released a couple of weeks ago. I want to read a little bit from it just so kind of like direct our conversation. So they're talking about the Great Resignation has led to a great reevaluation. They're sort of calling it, that's what they're calling it now, resignation to reevaluation about the place of work in our lives. People aren't just quitting their jobs. They're simply rethinking what they want out of life entirely. What people are resigning from is a culture of workism, the idea that we're defined primarily by our work and everything else, that life and mental health must fit into the increasingly small space that is left over. Finally realizing how backwards our thinking about work-life balance has been. The Great Resignation continues with a record number of workers, 4.5 million to be exact, deciding to leave their jobs just before the holidays in November. Among the key reasons are toxic culture, burnout, and the demand for more flexibility. People are simply wanting their lives to take more of a forefront. It's not just about work, work, work. In response to this collective mindset shift, forward-thinking companies are adjusting their approach to well-being in general. And this is what we'll expand on during today's discussion.
Beautiful.
Yay.
Did you happen to look at the article that I just read to you, the top 5 why people are leaving?
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about it a little bit later too.
Okay. I wanted to I wanted to just share real quick. I won't go into detail, but this article that I'm mentioning, MIT had done a huge amount of research on what is it that's really causing people to leave or not join a company. And the very, very first one is toxic culture. And they said a toxic culture, corporate culture is by far the strongest predictor of industry adjusted attrition, and at times 10 times more important than compensation and predicting turnover. What does toxic mean? Exactly. The author explains the main elements involve failure to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, workers feeling disrespected, and unethical behavior. And then the next one was insecurity and reorganization, not knowing if things are going to be end. And the next one was high levels of innovation. Actually, a company that has a lot of innovation they're finding that people are burnt out, and so they're leaving because there's too much innovation. That's the third one. The fourth one is failure to recognize their performance. And the fourth is poor response to COVID. So not money. And so carry on, Elizabeth. I know you were probably asking me something before I go on. Did you want to say something?
Oh, that was it. That was all.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Yeah. So have you, is this ring true for you guys? Is this what you've heard already? Is this new?
I think you've offered some really interesting concepts via that article, and I'm curious, does the article go into what all these folks are doing? Because I'm as you were reading those, Deb, I was obviously viewing those through the lens of the company I work for, and we do a really good job in a lot of those respects. But a large part of our business is, as I mentioned, transportation, and we're suffering like a lot of transportation companies are in the trucker shortages. You know, it's an aging culture, an aging demographic, and it's not something that young people are necessarily pursuing as they may have in the past. And so we get kind of, I don't know how to describe it other than our businesses, you know, it is split along the lines of blue collar versus white collar. And I'm kind of curious about that article, whether they get into any of those types of demographics or speak to what people are doing in the, you know, it's one thing to leave those environments, but then what are they, I guess we'll get into that. I don't,
Yeah. So
kinda
thank you
curious
for that.
how are people surviving? In other
Yeah,
words?
thank you. Yeah, it is curious, right, guys? So what I have read since, I don't know, when did they start coining this, the last year, is that people would rather not have a suffering culture, and they would rather not go to work. That's how much they do not want a suffering culture. And that is the number one, not so much what an organization does, whether it's trucking, whether it's healthcare, whether it's tech, although health and tech tend to be also big areas where people are leaving. It's the culture. And so it's very curious. I'm just going to say, I don't know if you guys have found this to be true. I've worked in corporations for many years, and I also was used to sell in corporations, and you could feel the energy. You don't even have to know the company very well. You could just walk into the office and you could feel ick. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, you could just feel that it's like there's something going on. There's this heavy, like, not healthy. And across the board, like, I work with billion-dollar corporations, million-dollar corporations, and I work with startups. It's across the board where people don't know how to hear each other. They don't know how to speak what's true for them without fear that they're going to be judged, or that it's not okay to say something, and this is our humanness. This is our humanness. And we were taught from a young age, when we went to school, Jim, you and I went to school together, we were taught what's acceptable. What's acceptable to get an A, what's acceptable to get from 4th grade to 5th grade, what's acceptable to get to graduate from college, blah, 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 blah. And the issue is more here that we have not stood for who we want to become, who are we called to become, and what are we here to do in this world? No one's asked us that from a young age. And so these younger people, what I've seen when I work at Vanderbilt or Belmont with these younger kids, they are like, I want to understand my purpose. I want to understand why I'm here. I want to understand not just what am I doing, like they could do anything, but what lights me up about what I'm doing. And so when we look at organizations now that people want to consider working, they're the ones that you want to hire, which I think is amazing. They're asking, are you learning and growing? Are you a learning and growing culture? What are you doing to get out of gossip? What are you learning to build collaboration? And is it okay to talk about what I'm thinking? Will I be heard? What is this? And I have found that a company's only going to go as far as a CEO or a business owner. If they're not growing and learning and doing their internal work, that's about as far as the culture is going to go. And it's a trickle down effect. So my toss to you all is, I don't know your situation. I don't know how committed you are to learning and growing versus blame, shame, culture. But this is really what they're looking at right now. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And then when they talk about workism, it's like, I'm not just here to show up and move stuff. I'm here to like feel like I matter. I matter in life. So thoughts, questions about that?
I mean, I definitely think this is true. I would be interested. So we've, as I mentioned, we've had almost no turnover in our company. I don't understand why, because I don't think we're getting all of these things right necessarily. It's not because we're perfect. I do know that some people are looking for new roles. I just sort of know through the grapevine, but they haven't left yet. I do know that there's some grumbling about comp, but it's not only comp. And so I guess I'm curious to know why people are staying. Like, to what degree does financial stability play into this? Because it sounds like a lot of people are just saying, it's so toxic, it doesn't matter if I can't pay my bills. But I feel like that's probably not the overall trend.
I think, Julie, you bring that up. I would ask your people.
Yeah.
I would ask them what keeps you here.
Pardon?
I would ask what's keeping you here.
Yeah.
I would ask them, what are you most enjoying about work? Where do you feel valued? Where do you feel that you're bringing purpose? And I'd ask them, where do you not? The person that wants to change their role, I would ask them, what would light you up? What would bring you joy? Now, see, this is the other thing I just want to share with you. Just being asked, you know this already, but when I say it, it's true. I mean, it'll be true, I think. When someone is just asked these questions, they automatically think Julie cares about me. She wants to know me. And that right there is like the biggest thing that whether you're interviewing someone for the first time or whether there's someone there for, for years. Yeah. The fact that you care about them and not just the role. Yeah. And I'm going to give you guys a beautiful example of this and what could really happen when we ask these questions. So one of my CEOs I work with, he's an engineering firm in Chicago. In November, I checked in on him and he's like, I want to tell you the story. He said, how we're growing our business. And he's a hugely successful engineering firm. He does oil and gas engineering. He's like, one of my engineers came to me and he said to me, I'd really like to do this role. Yeah. Not the one I'm doing, but I'd like to do X, Y, Z. Yeah. And he said, perfect. He's like, I want to support you in that, but I'm not able to move you right now to that role. He's like, let's work on it together so we can create in maybe a couple months, you can move into this. Let's work on this together and come up with it together. Yeah. So he said he went to making from 60,000. So he actually moved into the role that they both co-created together. He moved in the role. He said he was paying him 60,000 a year to 120,000 a year. Yeah. The reason he paid him more wasn't because he just asked for more. He said to me, because the client was so thrilled with what this person was now what he was doing, and he was excited to go to work and serve this client. The client wanted more of him. Yeah. Okay. And so it's very different if we can start to target what do people most want to do? How do we create a role that they want to do this and it lights them up versus I'm coming here to get paid and check in and we're half-assing it, because they're just getting a check. That's not what we want. So in my work, we want to discover what is someone's genius. What
Yeah.
are they awesome at? What do they love doing? How can we create a role? And it's scary because we haven't been taught that. And
Yeah.
does it really work? So the change formula for our growth for us as individuals, teams, organizations, there is a formula. Do you know it? Does anyone know what the change formula is?
No.
It is,
Or I don't anyway.
okay, so it's called, it's vision. So we all have a vision of how we want our culture, our corporation, our revenue for the year, our team, whatever it is, we have a vision.
Yeah.
That's never enough. Obviously, we know that to get to where we want to go to get our result. Vision must be X times amount of discomfort. There must be the same amount of discomfort as there is vision.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, this is a parentheses, plus the very next step that will have fear because it's new. So there's going to be fear because the ego doesn't know, and the ego, the amygdala,
Yeah.
wants to know, equals change. Now, the reason we don't get to change, why do you think that is?
Because
Well, maybe-
fear overrides, because I mean, I
What'd you
have
say?
to believe it has something to do with fear.
Yeah. What'd you say, Jim?
I was just going to ask you, Deborah, if you could expand on what you mean by discomfort,
Thank you.
why
Yep.
that needs to equal the vision.
Yeah. So we as humans, we have a small, I'm just going to go back. You guys probably already know this, so forgive me if I'm being redundant. The way we're all biologically wired is that we have a part of our brain that's called the amygdala. It's a very small part of our brain, and it's constantly scanning to keep you safe. It wants to keep you alive. It wants to keep you basically where you are. It doesn't want you to grow. It doesn't want you to even have joy. It just wants safety. So
Mhm.
we already have an internal stressor because we want to grow, we want to change, but then we got this small part of it like, oh, you can't do that. That's not going to happen. Oh, you better watch out for this. Or, oh, what's that person going to think? It's going to give you safety questions that you don't step. So when we have even trying to figure out answers is the amygdala work. It wants to know, and we can't know. So then it gets anxious. We can't know the future, but the ego is trying to always figure out, I'll say ego or stories. It's always trying to figure out the future. So we can't know, and it gets anxious, or it dwells on the past for safety and is looking at what went wrong. And so that means it's going to go wrong again, or that person's wrong. And then we hold on. We're not very much into the present. And when we're in present, we're able to think clearly, we're able to create clearly, we're able to hear our head, heart, and gut, emotional intelligence, which we haven't been taught. We're able to work on body intelligence and IQ. And so when we are in our ego, we don't like to try new things. It doesn't want new things. So that's the discomfort. Instead of getting uncomfortable, we distract ourselves from discomfort, right? What do we do when we're uncomfortable? Guys, tell me what you do when you're uncomfortable.
Procrastinate.
Procrastinate. Yeah, perfect. What else do we do?
Procrastinate.
Just find more appealing things to work on.
Yeah.
Find something else to do. For me, it might be riding my bike. It might be having a drink. It might be not saying something because I don't want to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. It might mean sleeping longer. You know, that we find ways to distract ourselves from discomfort, but it has to happen in order for growth to happen. So we must build a culture that welcomes discomfort, and we grow in discomfort, and we start to understand our thinking, our small ways, our egoic patterns that pull us back.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can start to have these engaging conversations. And so can we welcome the stretch within our organization, welcome and talk through the fear? Can we welcome and talk through the frustration? Can we welcome and talk through the sadness even? So, and that's part of our humanness, but we've shoved ourselves in a box pretty much in school and said, don't feel your feelings, don't talk about it, don't be real, and people are like, no, and that's not even emotional intelligence, right? So that's our learning, that's our growth. So this is all a part of, I think it's perfect that this is all happening, guys, for us, because we get to step into a greater part of ourselves and raise very different companies if we're willing to learn. So that's what discomfort means. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sure does. And I think the last thing you just said is what has the most bearing for people like me, because you do have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to learn, because these concepts are foreign to our generation. I think, like you said, Deb, we've been wired a certain way. We've been trained a certain way. I can recall conversations I've, had with my kids and my wife, like, there's no place for like that type of emotion in the workplace. You have to be very cautious of, showing feeling and getting upset, or, because you'll be viewed a certain way. And so these are definitely new concepts for sure.
Totally new concepts. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I was just going to I was kind of thinking about Julie's comments, and I don't know, it's interesting to me because I think my company is very progressive and has done a lot on the top 5 things that you started with. Yet we've lost a good number of people. And like I started by saying, we've had to take some pretty extreme measures, I think, to keep some good people. But we've had like what you were describing, Deborah. I've had stay interviews with everybody that reports to me, like you said, taking them to coffee outside the office and saying, why do you stay here? What do you like about the company? What do you like about the group, the team you're on, the things you're doing? What other things could you be doing? Not committing to promises, obviously, because, lots of people mention compensation and things like that. And there's only so much as a manager that I can advance in that regard. But it is a very powerful tool, I will say. And yet we still have attrition.
Yeah. And so it's beautiful because it's not I do this and then I have what I want. It's always a continuous learning. So it's to get curious. So my work is around, one, how do I take radical responsibility for the results I have? I might not like them, but they are. Whatever I have is what I'm committed to. And that's really like uncomfortable too, because it's like, oh, I have that. So how am I unconsciously? So 95% of the time we are unaware. We are not conscious. So when that happens, we have the egoic safety mind running our thoughts, which bring about our emotions, which bring about our behaviors. And we're unaware of it. So every time we're like, I thought I had this conversation and I'm still getting this result, or it's for you, Jim, it's for you, Julie, it's for me to ask, where was I asleep with the switch and I'm running my pattern? Because when we're in the egoic pattern, in the pattern of what we have done, we're defensive. And when we're defensive, because that's what the ego does, it wants to protect us, we can't hear of someone else. This is why board meetings are a nightmare. And why I hear from executives all the time, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have another meeting. It's the same thing. We talk about the same thing over and over, and we never get anywhere because people don't hear each other. Why is that? Because they're threatened. This is a biological thing. It's no judgment against anyone. It's a biological thing, unless we're aware that my defenses are up. Now we can get past our defenses. We have to learn new tools. This is my work. We have to learn, how do I breathe? I do a lot of breathing practice. I teach breathing around how to get out of our defense, our thinking. How do we get out of our thinking that keeps us in this pattern? So it's like, when I get a result I don't want, how am I unconsciously creating it? How is it my biggest teacher? So one thing is, Jim and Julie too, I know you know this too, is to wonder, the people that are with me, that I get to be blessed to have in my life, to coach or to support, do they believe, is there an elephant in the room? Is what I'd ask them. Because I do culture surveys, and I ask 14 questions of my executives first. It is anonymous questions. And then I do and there's usually one thing that they're all having an elephant, or I want to say white elephant, an elephant in the room. And that elephant people dance around, and it becomes this fear. And it keeps people, or then they gossip about it, and then they have this temporary alignment with that person that they're gossiping with, but then they learn, well, I can't really trust that person because they're talking about so and so. And this starts to create a very unhealthy culture. If there is gossip, you have a very toxic culture. That means you can't really talk to the person that you have an issue with around what they can only be the change agent to. So my number one thing for you both to look at is, where is gossip happening? That means there's a lack of trust. And what's the elephant in the room? And if you want to get on another call with me, I'm happy to talk to you about what a culture survey looks like. That's one of the things I do. But so that would be one thing. And again, I don't know what your leadership is like. I don't know what your CEO, COO, and Julie, you are one, how people view you. And that's scary too, to have a survey done around, like, how do people view me? Am I approachable? Now again, guys, no blame or shame. I'm going to say no, not always. And I'm not always approachable because I have my defenses too. So we want to find out, where am I not hearing? Where am I my pattern? Where can I hear better? How can I be a co-creator? And again, if you are a listener, that's the number one thing people need is, would she just listen to me? Would he just hear me? They don't have to change and do what I'm asking, but would they just hear me? That's, again, a huge change agent. So I highly recommend doing some kind of culture survey, Jim and Julie. Like, if you really want to grow your business and you're committed to growing a culture, it's like, how am I showing up? How are we showing up as a team right now? Where are our holes? What can we learn? What tools can we learn, each and all of us, to practice growing the way we show up in the world, the way we show up with each other?
That's interesting. Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Julie?
I was actually thinking that we probably need to do it for the management team, not just for me. I mean, of course, I'm not trying to deflect from me, but because I realize it sounds like that.
Oh, sure. No, just kidding.
But I don't for example, I don't directly manage product and dev. And while we're not losing any people, we do have performance issues there. So then that's important. I know that there are rumors of turnover in sales. I don't directly manage sales, but each of us, the CEO, the co-founder, myself, and one other person, do manage, we've sort of divided it up. And so then I'm curious to know, if we've divided it up, should we still do it individually for the whole company? Like, maybe it really matters what people in dev and product think about me, even though I don't manage them directly.
Yeah. So how many people are in your firm?
34.
Yeah, it's small enough. I would definitely just over here. My recommendation is everyone. So
that's great to know. That's great. No, that's great.
Yeah. And what I want to say, guys, is when someone doesn't feel like they can show up and be accepted for who they are, that they're going to be, that they have value or worth around their thoughts and what they want to create, or that someone is listening to them. And I'm just going to tell you, this has happened over and over again with my exec firms that I work with. For instance, I'm going to give you an example. Worked with a $25 billion wealth management firm in Chicago for years, and worked with the 12 executives. Every year it would be like, okay, the CEO would be like, okay, what's our goals for next year? And, where are we now? And blah, blah, and everyone had their role depending on where in the US they worked and what their responsibility was. And it came down to like this, he was trying to push people and control, like to get certain things done. And he's a very kind man, very loyal, loving man. It's not around his personality, but his anxiety was about unconsciously, he had to have things a certain way in order to feel safe. And he unconsciously didn't fully trust each of his executive team. Now, this went on for years, because he felt this is the way we should do it and they're not doing it. So I need to step in and put my hands in the cookie jar to make sure they're doing this by when. And he would say, are you checking in with me around what the plan is? Are you checking in with me? And eventually the whole executive team finally said, you know, I'm just gonna say his first name, Dick, like, why should we do it? Because you're going to do it anyway. You're going to check in and whatever we come up with isn't going to be the right answer. So why even bother? Why, like, you're going to fix it or not hear us, or, and that culture had been built. Now, this is, you know, obviously a very revenue rich company, but the team wasn't working well. Just think about how much money they were leaving on the table by not even just showing up and really giving their ideas and saying how their division could grow, because they felt like their leader wasn't fully going to accept them or hear them. He was just going to say, this is the way we're going to do it. Now, most leaders do this. I will tell you this right now. Most leaders have a right way. And if you don't line up, they don't mean to do it. They just do it out of fear. Then they're going to discount the other people. And then the other people are like, why bother? Eventually they'll just be like, I'm going to half, you know what, it unconsciously, they're not going to fully show up. Sales guys, I used to sell mainframe computers. Let me tell you, sales is the most toxic, icky place unless they're doing this kind of work.
Yeah.
It is like a revolving door because it's numbers based, numbers based, numbers based.
Yeah.
Where do the numbers come from? Oh, it just sounds like a great number for you to, like, you've got $1 million revenue to take on this year. Okay, well, you know, was this a discussion? Like, how am I going to do? This is what you got to do or you're out. Well, that is no way to run a business, right? This is no way. And so I just want to say that we've got to look at how can we do this differently? How can we, how can we have discussions? How can we get outside of our egoic thinking to dream big and to have ideas that are not what we normally think of, and how we relate to each other. That's where it starts. That's I can say about that. What are you guys thinking?
I think it makes sense. I think it's an interesting observation in sales. I do think we're seeing some of that.
It reminded me of a example that really kind of was a gut punch for me when I spent 9 years at Wells Fargo. I'd spent a lot of time in the banking industry, and I thought I was working for one of the most ethically run institutions, only to find out that, you know, just as you were describing, Deb, on the sales side, they were being pushed so hard that the, you know, certain individual salespeople and their managers were complicit in, you know, effectively signing customers up for things they didn't ask for. So, you know, you go into Wells Fargo for a home mortgage, and you know, all of a sudden you have a credit card account and a savings account opened in your name just so they could make their numbers, because it was all about, you know, every person that walks through the door should have at least 7 accounts with Wells Fargo. It's like, never mind that they only wanted the mortgage. So these people were under such extreme pressure, like you said, and that was very much a top-down mentality from the CEO. Like, and that, it just blew me away that, you know, as a SEC regulated and bank regulated entity, that we could stray so far from the ethical, you know, training that was beat into us. Like every 6 months we had to take ethical training.
Yeah, you're
You know
like,
what I
wait
mean?
a minute, this doesn't light up. So this is a beautiful, thank you, Jim, for sharing. This is beautiful that you're bringing this up, because this is normal. Because people get so scared. And then this fear takes over. And then we don't even think straight. And we're making decisions that make no sense because it's a temporary hit, a temporary fix. But in the long run, we know it's going to blow up. But it's a temporary, we call it hero situation, makes us feel good temporarily, but it's not a long-term solution. And we all do that, right? So having these discussions. So what did you do about that, Jim? Did you ever say anything about it?
I don't work there anymore.
Okay, you laughed, right? You laughed, exactly. You laughed, exactly.
That kind of nails it, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that was the only reason, but
Yeah.
actually a lot of what you're talking about is what led me away. I spent, like I said, I'd had a good many rewards working in banking and worked with great people, but the opportunity to come to XPO was one of a very nimble, very fast-paced organization, very progressive, forward-thinking, and it did take me out of my comfort zone. Without it, like within the first 2 weeks, I was tasked with doing a large legal entity restructuring. I knew nothing about the company, but it was like the best thing they could have done for me because it naturally put me in touch with all the key players around the organization, helped me start off those relationships, and really kind of set me up for some real success since then. I'm coming on my 5-year anniversary now with XPO. And, but some of what you're saying really resonates, Deborah, and I have a question, because I've been guilty of the fear factor as well, using your term. And I think for me personally, it's been more one of fear of, because we're getting older, right? And I'm not ready to retire, but I don't want to feel like I'm no longer useful. And so I've always managed people below me to be on my heels because I feel like smaller gaps make for better experiences for people. Then as I progress up, they can move up and there's not big gaps to fill. And so, but that said, I'm getting to a point where I don't want to be like the old shoe and not have, I am sort of the elder statesman on the team, and I don't consider myself that old. So and while I have a very strong team underneath me, I don't want to get to a point where I can't offer them anything. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. So I want
like you teach them everything, and then why do they need you, sort of thing.
So beautiful, beautiful. I love that you notice you're in fear. I love that you notice you have a pattern. I love that you notice you've got this process around it, right, guys? We all do this.
Yeah.
So I want you to notice the simple thing is, this is coming up for me because I had this conversation with my clients earlier. She was saying, I don't want this, I don't want that, I don't want, I said, I want you to say what you do want. Because the ego says, I don't want. Because it's like defend. So Jim, I want you to say, this is what I do want. This is how I want to live my life every day. This is what I want to create for myself, no matter how long I decide to work. And you get to decide how long you work. I want to work for 5 more years, and this is how I want to show up. This is the kind of culture I do want to build. This is the kind of team I do want to build. This is what I want to keep growing and learning. I want to ask them, what do they want to keep growing and learning? What do you want? What do you want, and stand for it? And listen to your heart. Notice what your heart says, not your brain. What does your heart desire? And go there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm signing off now. I'm going to turn in my retirement notice. No, I asked my wife, like, when do you think I can retire? And she's like, retire? What are you talking about? Okay, so you gotta put that in there too, Deborah. It's like,
yeah. Well, so I want you to listen.
Not just my decision.
Well, but the thing is, guys, we all have decisions. We make them all day long. We have 70,000 thoughts a day. They say, this is what science says, about 70,000 thoughts come bouncing in our head, and they're going to be negative thoughts mostly. They're going to be defensive thoughts. And then when we have thoughts, it triggers an emotion, because thoughts are energy in our brain. And the energy in our brain triggers, that's why we do EEGs, is to see what kind of process how is our brain working. It actually triggers emotion then in our body, which is energy and motion, that brings emotion, and then brings behaviors. And like I said earlier, and those behaviors are going to be defense. So I love to say, if you guys walk away from anything from this, is 1, say this is what I do want. 2, listen to your heart. 3 is learning breathing practices. This changed my life. Because when we are in defense, which is 95% of the time, our body does this. The muscles tighten and constrict because it thinks you're at threat. And when your muscles tighten, your chest gets tight and you can't fully breathe. Your lungs are actually from the top of your head or shoulders to the bottom of your waist. And you're only breathing from here to here when you're like that. And so you're not even, actually, this is science, you're not fully oxygenating your brain. So when you're not fully oxygenating your brain, you're not thinking about all the options. You're only thinking like of 2 options. So my toss for you is to take 3 deep breaths. I actually just did a podcast on this. It's on LinkedIn. If you want, I'll send it to you. Is to take 3 deep lower belly breaths when you're not triggered, when you're not experiencing an emotional overtake. Take in 3 deep breaths from your belly, up through your chest, up through your nose. I say breathe in for 5, hold for a count of 2, and then release out through your mouth for 6. Because it fully oxygenates your lungs and it actually biologically changes your chemistry in your blood. When we're run by our threat, we have cortisol running through. It's an adrenaline rush and we get addicted to the adrenaline rush, right? And we're like, ah! When we start to do the breathing and we change the blood chemistry, we have serotonin, the happy thoughts, that I'm okay where I am feelings, that I can hear someone. Well, rarely, we weren't taught this, right? So I would say practice, guys, 3 deep breaths in the morning, lunch, and right before bed. And then start to expand, start noticing when you're driving, because I used to live in Chicago most of my life, I'm hanging on for dear life to the steering wheel because I'm feeling like I'm going to get hit by another car. And I notice I'm like, yeah. So I would like breathe when I'm driving. And it continues to change my life. The third thought I would say is, besides saying, what do I do want, and breathing, the third one I would say to you is the opposite thought that I'm telling myself that's causing me to get into a tizzy, that's causing me to like get anxious or frustrated or whatever it is. And I notice I have this thought over and over about my spouse, about my kids, about my coworker, about my boss. How could the opposite of that thought be true or even truer? Because again, our automatic thought is going to be a judging negative thought that something's wrong, someone's wrong, or something will go wrong. That one thought has got me into curiosity. So consciousness is about curious. Can I get curious around everything? When I'm curious, the world's my oyster. I have limitless opportunities. When I'm at threat, I don't have opportunities. So I want you guys to get into curiosity, and the opposite is, how could the opposite be true? Automatically brings you into curiosity. And it's kind of funny because our ego is silly. It really is, because we're not really a threat, but we act like it, and we take everything so damn seriously. So what if things aren't so serious? What if we're not dying? What if we have what we need right now? What if we're fine right where we are? How could that be true? How could it really be true? And the ego says the opposite. You're not okay. You're not enough. You don't have enough. It's a lie to keep you safe. So, Julie, what were you saying?
No, I just said that's very interesting. That's really helpful, the triggering the curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I know we have just a few more minutes. I want to honor our time, and I'm just so appreciative of you guys being here. And Jim, it's so Julie, you don't know this, Elizabeth knows this. Jim and I went to elementary school together.
Oh, that's so
I know, it's so great. So I'm just so happy to see him. Yeah,
but tell him the real story, Deb.
No, you tell the story. You tell it. It's better if you tell it.
Deborah and I as she said, went to elementary school together, and we had a pretty nice gym teacher. His name was Mr. Creepop, but sometimes living in Cleveland, the weather didn't always cooperate, so he had to get creative on what to do with us during phys ed period. And so one rainy, cold day, he had all of us arm wrestling each other. So he had all the boys in a bracket arm wrestle each other, and then all the girls did the same. And wouldn't you know, at the end of it, Deborah and I were the champions of our genders. But guess who crushed me when she and I had to face off? Not, it wasn't even, I mean, my recollection isn't that bad, but it wasn't, it was, let's just say embarrassing. It looked like I didn't even put up a fight, but actually she made quick work of me, even though I beat
That's
all the boys.
hilarious.
So
Oh my God, it's so funny. But the funny thing is, Julie and Elizabeth, that's how we reconnected. I'll never forget it in Facebook. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, Jim. It's been that
Yeah.
long. Jim like finds me on Facebook and he says, I finally have overcome the humiliation of
That's
fourth
right.
grade.
That's
Not that
awesome.
Yeah. So guys, I want us to have fun like this. I want us to have fun in our workplaces, and it's possible. It's possible to get out of the put your head down and right. And so if you're interested in talking with me more, get on a half-hour call, or your boss or whatever it is. Like, how do we change culture? How are we each responsible for being the change in our culture? And maybe we do a culture survey. I'd love to just start there, because I don't know if you know my story, but I almost died. June will be 9 years ago. I used to be a competitive cyclist. As Jim attested, I was very strong and I was the winner always. I had to be the winner when I was unconscious. And I was put in a coma, and I had 9 shattered ribs, punctured lung, separated shoulder. I was not expected to live. And when I woke up out of my coma, I cried out to God and said, my life is more than getting things done and winning and helping others do that. I don't want to miss my purpose, why I'm here on this earth. I need to know why I'm here. I need to know why I'm here. And long and short of it is, we lived in a very wealthy town outside of Chicago. I'm finally 8 months after my accident, and back up, the neurologist told me it was going to take 3 years for my brain to heal. That's how severely it was injured. And I said, hell no, it's not. Because I already learned that what I believe is what I create. And so 8 months, I'm back on the bike, and my coach is like, I can't believe you're exactly where you're at. And I'm driving my kids to school. My little girl's 11, my son's 16. He's getting on the train to go to the city of Chicago for school. And my little girl sees these wealthy, beautiful, perfectly dressed people getting on the train going to work. I'm driving away, and I hear her little voice whisper in the back. And she says, Mama, why does everyone look so sad getting on the train going to work? And I was like, oh man, like it was a stab in my heart, because all I could say was, you're right. I dropped her off and I went home to get on my bike, and I'm just about to go over the tracks where she made that comment like 15 minutes later. And I heard my purpose, guys. And it was, thank God I almost died doing something I love doing, and I was awesome at it. These dear precious people are dying a slow death every day, doing something they don't most want to do. And they don't even realize that they're dying. I'm here to wake them the hell up. I knew that was my purpose. I don't know how I was going to do it, but I knew that was my purpose. And I believe you have a purpose, which I call your genius. You have this in your heart. Everyone does. All we need to do is listen to it, and things will unfold as it should. And then I studied consciousness for 6 years. I went to NYU and studied blah, 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 blah. I told all these things. It all just unfolded, because this is what I'm to do. And I love it. And I'll do it till I die. Waking people up to who they're called to be and what they're here to do. So my want for you is to discover that more than anything. That's what I want for you.
terrific.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Very inspiring. And I really am glad that I joined today. This was really helpful.
So glad. So glad. Yeah. Reach out to me if you need if you have any questions. Thank you for
Awesome.
being here. Any
Thank
last
you.
words before we hang up?
Have a great week.
Yeah, you
Yeah, you as
too.
well. Thanks very much.
So good to see you guys. Take
You as
care.
well.
Everybody,
Thank
take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye.